And here we go.
Welcome to the Great Work Insights podcast by the O.C. Tanner Institute, the show that features the people, the professionals, the thought leaders, and the coolest companies. And now your host, the man navigating the discussion about the culture, the organized chaos, and the best practices that compel great work, Todd Nordstrom.
I was thinking about generation differences lately and thinking about a recent canoe trip that I was on in Canada with a bunch of my friends. Most of us on the trip were Gen Xers, but there was also one older gentleman, a baby boomer, and one very young man, a millennial. The first night after setting up camp, we were all sitting around the campfire, being the young man's first trip, the millennial's first trip into the woods. Actually, he was a city boy, and this was the first time he was really into the wilderness. He was obviously filled with a lot of questions. And being the veteran, the older man, 25 plus years of leading our fishing trip into the woods, the baby boomer, well, he was full of answers. Eventually, at night, our conversation got to the point where it was obvious that the millennial was a little bit anxious. He was realizing for the first time that we weren't turning around to go back to some cabin or something, that we were actually stuck there in the middle of the woods for a week, and he had to deal with whatever circumstances arose. And that's when he asked the inevitable question, guys, what do we do if a bear comes into our campsite? Well, a few of us responded confidently, well, just make a lot of noise and it'll get scared off. The young man sat quietly thinking about our response, unsure if making noise was a good defense mechanism for a bear. The older man was enjoying the anxiety of the younger man, the millennial. Seeing the questions rolling around in the millennial's expression, the older man broke the silence by joking, and if your noise doesn't scare the bear away, well, run. Run as fast as you can and as far as you can. Of course, the funny part of that statement is that we were camping on a small island, so it's not like there's really any place to run. The millennial, quiet, sitting, thinking, knowing the joke was on him, finally responded to the boomer. But I don't have to outrun the bear, he said with a smile. I just have to outrun the slowest guy. And he nodded towards the oldest man. It was a great response. The older man smiled at the response. He paused. He stood from the log he was sitting on. He brushed off his pants, and he turned to the young man. With a smile on his face, he said, "Sleep well tonight, kid. And if you happen to find any black licorice in your pockets, just ignore it. I didn't have any room to store that licorice, so I filled your pockets and your backpack and even found a few places in your tent. I don't think bears will be attracted to the sweet smell of black licorice, but then again, what does an old guy like me know?" And everyone laughed, of course. This is a light-hearted example of generational differences, exposing the different perspective of those that may have very fresh eyes and tons of energy, comparing those to those people that may have oodles and years of experience and strategy. However, this conversation about generational differences in the workplace has become a huge talking point and focus of organizations. How different are various generations? Has technology made the gap between generations bigger than before? Our guest today can surely shed some light on the conversation. Dubbed by her friends as the Millennial Whisperer, Lee Caraher actually prefers to be called the Millennial Champion. As a communications expert and author, sought-after speaker, and trainer, Lee helps companies and teams reduce the drama that may arise from communication gaps. And she helps managers and leaders better prepare for the differences new generations may create in the future. Lee, welcome to the show.
Todd, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I want to start with a very basic question today.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a lot of conversation about the differences in generations. The news media is talking about it, business media is talking about it, and there's even a lot more specific talk about millennials. Is all this I don't want to call it worry, but is all the conversation necessary? Is the worry real that there are so many differences? Are millennials really all that different than Gen X and baby boomers?
So before I hired any, I would have said no. But then I did hire millennials, and I have to say yes. And it's not bad. It just is, right? And I think, we talk about it today. And if you look at the news today, I mean, if you just Google millennials in the workplace, you would find over probably 4 million negative entries.
Oh, wow.
Or about working with millennials in the workplace. I mean, really? as if generational conflict was new, right? And it has been going on since Adam and Eve had their child. It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So the difference is, I think a couple things make it more real for us all. One, the economy really has done a number on traditional thoughts around workplace and tenure and generations. And two, technology has really upended the expectations of individuals around their own ability to make a difference and to have impact in the world. So those, basically those two things together, plus a lot of other things, so do sort of set these generations apart and particularly in terms of expectations and the gap between expectations and reality.
See, I have a question, though, because I'm a tried and true member of Gen X. And when I was first entering the workforce, maybe I wasn't aware of it, but this conversation didn't seem to exist. Or like I said, maybe I just wasn't paying attention. It didn't seem like any companies were tailoring to Gen X's needs. It was kind of like the baby boomers were saying, you fit in or get out. Why do you think it? Do you think millennials are more different than Gen X was than baby boomers?
The difference is, so let me just address that a couple of ways. One is the difference is in size of generation. So First, the boomers are 79 million boomers in this country. There are about 80 million millennials in this country. There are about 45 million Gen Xers in this country. Mm-hmm. So almost half of both of the bookended generations, right? Yeah. So number one, there just aren't as many of you as there are either boomers or millennials. So when Gen X was coming into the workforce, so when did you have your first job after school? What year?
Oh, I was working before I was out of school full time. So I was.
So what year was that?
91.
Yeah. So 91 to 98, huge boom economy all around the country. And if you were in the technology sector, internet boom is happening around 95 to 99, 2000, right? So just as Gen Xers are coming into the workforce, the economy is expanding. Boomers are moving up, and boomers grew up in a wait my turn generation. We just, we got into the workforce, and I'm a boomer. Mm-hmm. Got in the workforce, and we waited our turn, and we moved up the ladder, right? Then Gen Xers come into the workforce, and there are not enough Gen Xers to fill the bottom ranks. There just aren't physically enough Gen Xers to fill the bottom ranks. So most Gen Xers could command a lot of attention, particularly on the coasts. And I'm in San Francisco most of the time, and at that time in San Francisco, if you had a pulse, you got a job,
Yeah.
And there was a lot of complaining about Gen Xers, but there was nothing you could do about it, right? There was not another workforce you could pull in and just put into these knowledge jobs. The other piece, so that's the first piece. The other piece of that is that Gen Xers versus boomers, Gen Xers were the first, we call them the latchkey generation. Because there are fewer of you, there are many more single children in the Gen X community than there are in the boomer cohort or in the millennial cohort. This is the group of people who are very independent. They don't want to be told what to do. They can go do it by themselves. We'll let you know how it turned out. They're used to fending for themselves, right?
Sure. We all got out of school, went home by ourselves while our parents were working, and helped ourselves
right?
Helped ourselves to pudding pops, right?
or Cheetos or
That's
something.
right, that's
And
right.
television you shouldn't have watched, right?
Yeah.
So there's a very different kind of situation for, and it was a relief in many places. It was a relief for boomers. Like, oh my gosh, someone who can take care of themselves, right? So that dynamic between boomers and Xers at that time, between 91 and 2000, was the Gen Xers were in control for sure. They could get a job pretty quickly. They could move around. There was a lot of opportunity. Then 2000 happened. The Nasdaq implodes. The dot-com bubble bursts, and definitely people on the coast felt it first, but then it sort of trickled to the middle of the country, right? Mm-hmm. And this is right when Gen Xers are starting their careers, at the beginning of their careers. So if you're on the older edge of that, you may not have felt it so much, but the younger people of your generation definitely felt this, where there was no opportunity. All of a sudden, they couldn't get jobs. Then 9/11 happens, and everything changes. Everything changes, because not only is the economy moving in the downward position, then 9/11 happens, and the world changes for us all in this country. So there are Gen Xers, you may have gone as an adult, you may have gone to the gate to pick up a family member at the airport. Well, a millennial has never done that as an adult, ever, right? Mm-hmm. So then you think about, so 2001 happens. So millennials are born between 1980 and 2000. So the first millennials are coming into the workplace around 2001, 2002, right?
Yeah.
So right as the world is changing is when millennials are coming in the workplace. And there are millions of them, right? Yeah. Millions of them in a compressed job situation. We're going into war. Hundreds of thousands of people are going to armed forces, blah, 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 blah. We can go on for days. Then the housing crisis, starts, and then the economy implodes in 2008. Well, this happens right as Gen Xers are hitting the second most important part of their career, early 30s, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. Early 30s to, mid 30s. And 6 million people, or depending on who you talk to, 6 or 8 million people lose their jobs. Those are mostly boomers and Xers. Yeah. They weren't as many millennials, and they were cheap, right? Yeah, yeah. So the boomers who hang on to their jobs because they've just lost 40 to 80% of their savings, right? Mm-hmm. Boomers are hanging on to the jobs if they can. Millions of boomers thought they were going to retire in 2008, between 2008 and 2011, who are still working today. Well, that has created a tremendous amount of compression on the job market for Xers, because they would have anticipated moving up the chain, right?
Sure.
But if a boomer could hang on to their job, and they needed to, they did, right? If they could. Mm-hmm. Then, at the same time, millions of millennials are coming in the workforce, right? Who are pretty cheap in comparison, who know how to work computers better than anybody else. And there's just this moment in the last, and this is really when, there was this dialogue about millennials before 2008, mm-hmm. but it really picks up in 2011. Because in 2011, things are trying to get back on, we're trying to get back on course as an economy. And there are millions of people still looking for work, and millions of millennials, cheap labor, coming out of college, being able to live at home. 39% of millennials live at home. 28% of working millennials live at home. Wow. Who don't have to rent, right? So they have just much more possibility of having a lower salary. Is that a good thing? We can talk about that all day. But I just think that the dynamic of when you have literally millions of boomers who think they should have retired by now, who still have to work to pay the bills and the retirement, Gen Xers who have been basically waiting for their turn, but have been compressed by the economy not once but twice, and then millions of millennials who get out of college. And millennials are more educated, meaning, when I say more educated, I mean more millennials by percentage and sheer number have college degrees. And in many cases, the college degree is a new high school degree from a knowledge worker perspective, mm-hmm. Who graduate from college expecting work, because we've all been promised work if we go to college, don't have it. And, there's this huge tension around all of those things together. So it is true that it is true that Gen Xers may not have felt it when they first got into the workplace. The dynamic was definitely true for boomers who were like, who are these kids and how come they can have a better job than I did?
Yeah.
But there were so few of you, right? And then on the back end, as Gen Xers got older and the economy again went into the tank, is when the millennials were coming into the workforce. And so Gen Xers have really been squeezed from both sides.
I like you use the word compression and you use the word tension and I know that you speak to, train, and consult with numerous companies and leaders about drama in the workplace.
Yeah.
Because of this compression and tension, is drama a bigger issue today? Do you think there's more drama today maybe than 15 or 20 years ago?
I think there is drama. I think there's always been drama. But drama played itself out at home with older people, and drama plays itself out more at work with younger people. And I think what that is, millennials have grown up with so much power in their hands. Particularly younger millennials, 16 to 22-year-olds, these kids are learning with iPads at the desk, or computers at the desk. They are working at videos at night and doing homework in the classroom. They are used to, and the whole generation is used to being able to have the impression, at least, that they can get any piece of information by just going to Google. They can email anybody by just figuring out what their email address is. They can tweet at a company and they'll change their policy because it's true, because there are examples of this. So millennials, the hierarchy that boomers definitely grew up in and Xers inherited, the idea of hierarchy is really antithetical to the millennial experience. So you have a millennial comes in the office, they see something that they know they can improve because they just are more innate technically. Oh, we could shave off 20 minutes right there by doing this instead of that. Mm-hmm. And they don't know about hierarchy because they've never really experienced hierarchy unless you're an elite athlete or musician or science kid. You have not really experienced that kind of hierarchy in competition. So they just say something, right? Immediately. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I talk to are like, well, this millennial, he got into the work. We're very excited about him. His first week, he shows up in the CEO's office with some things he can improve on. I hear that all the time. Now, this is not, the millennials not being rude.
No.
Millennials at all. They don't think they're being rude. They don't think they're being wrong. They think that I found some things we can do better. I'm going to share that information. Well, that creates tension. Because maybe your boomer boss is not expecting you to show up and say, you're doing things all wrong here, right? Or they may not have, even the millennial might not have said it that way, but that is what an older person feels. They hear it as criticism of the way they've done things, as opposed to help from somebody who can contribute to making something better. So that drama comes from different expectations around roles, responsibilities, and ways to participate, not because anybody I really believe it has nothing to do with being rude. Sure. It has nothing to do with being entitled. It has nothing to do with all these things. It just has to do with millennials have grown up with the power to participate from their youth. They've been compensated. They grew up with apps on their phone that they find bugs for, and then they let Apple know, and then Apple pays them money. Mm-hmm. It's a whole different kind of equation around seeing something, fixing something, than what particularly boomers and many Gen Xers grew up in their careers with.
Well, I think it's interesting when you talk about that too, because the perception of millennials has to be so much different than it was for boomers and Gen Xers, as they grew up watching other kids become high-paid YouTubers or whatever the case may be, where anything becomes possible because they can see all these different possibilities where you and I didn't have that, Right. Well,
I think that is a perception, right? Because there are the number of YouTubers who are actually making a lot of money. It's very small.
Yeah.
Right? But they exist, and we can see them by just going on to YouTube, right? The kids, overnight sensations are usually aren't true, right? They work really hard at it. But if they're 16 years old, all of a sudden, right, here they are. So the possibility for anybody to break through is there, right? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It takes a lot of skill, will, determination, and effort. But the impression is that things happen more easily.
Yeah.
I think what happens more easily is that there's more opportunity on different platforms. But there's many more people but there's so many more people that by percentage is probably smaller actually than for Gen Xers.
Sure. But you're right, that hierarchical perception doesn't exist. If you and I wanted to be famous when we were young, we would have had to get a job on MTV or something,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Oh my gosh, think about podcasters. We have so many, I'm a podcaster, you're a podcaster, so many podcasters. The idea of niching, right, is the niching your audience. Well, you can be important to 10 people and you're really good, you know?
Hey, Lee, let's talk about your new book. I'm excited to talk about this. Your book is titled Millennials in Management, The Essential Guide to Making It Work at Work. What made you, here you sit, you're running a business and you're talking about hiring millennials, and then you sit down and you go, you know what, I want to write a book about a generation that I'm not a part of. Why?
Actually, the book came out of my experience of failing miserably at hiring and retaining millennials.
Really?
Miserably. And before I started my own company, I worked for two very large organizations where I managed over 750 people in one and over 650 people in the other. Literally 10 years before I started my own business, that's who I was managing, that many people, that many offices. Mm-hmm. When I started my own company, I only hired people who had 10 years of experience for the first 7 years. After 2008, we changed the business model, as everybody should after an economy changes, right? Yeah. And we decided to start hiring young people again. I thought nothing of it. I had been so successful at hiring and retaining and bringing up young people in my previous two jobs. Failed miserably. My company hired 6 millennials within 8 weeks of each other, and they were all gone within 3 months. Oh, wow. One person could be their problem, but 6 people, I never had 100% failure in recruiting ever. And I was like, my first reaction was, well, those were stupid. And then my second reaction was, I said, no, I'm really good at this. I'm really good at recruiting. It must be the experience here that, some people left because we wanted them to. Other people left because they wanted to. But I'd never had that dynamic happen. So I started looking into it and talked to a lot of people, and I heard from boomers like, oh, those terrible millennials, just so negative. I started looking online and like, oh my God, everything is so negative. And I cannot be negative about the future of my company. And the future of my company is not in me staying until I'm 97 years old. Yeah. It is in someone else taking over for me who's much younger than me. So I went back I decided to interview millennials. I read a lot of stuff. Anything that was negative, I discounted. I just threw it away. And we came up with a way of working in my company that has yielded a really low return, very low churn on the whole company, actually, but very low churn, particularly in millennials in comparison to other companies in our area. So, for instance, in San Francisco, in the last 2 years, the average millennials under 30 stays in the company for 2 years. Well, it's very costly. In some cases, 13 months is all you can get out of them. Yeah. It's very costly, and my goal is we're just going to double that. We're just going to double that to 4 years, and that's where we are right now. The average tenure for a millennial is 4 years at my company. So we had figured some stuff out, and then my agency. So my agency is a PR and social media firm. We work with, big brands, little brands, startups, food companies, technology. We work with a lot of different kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And then my clients were asking me for help with their millennials.
Oh.
And so that happened. Because we do a lot of internal communications too. Yeah. And that sort of happened side by side with me figuring it out internally. And then I just happened to be meeting with, it's a very long story, but meeting with a publisher who became my publisher. And in the course of this conversation, she said, I will publish that book. And I was like, what book are you talking about? And that book about millennials, that book. I'm like, I don't have a book. I do have a policy. So, that doesn't happen very often where someone offers to publish your thoughts.
Sure.
So I took that as a sign that I should do that, and basically put together the book, which is the whole goal of the book is to be helpful, right? I know this is happening. I see it all the time. I'm getting asked to talk and speak and do workshops all the time on this topic. And the book was really written to say, here's a blueprint of how you can get rid of what's negative between your generations in your company and turn it into a positive thing.
So the audience for this book, would the audience be boomers and Gen Xers, or is it generationally focused for the audience, or is it if you're a manager, you need to know this?
Well, I wrote the book to be read by teams, actually. So cool. Sometimes, I think that one of the biggest problems with business books is that, leaders read it and then they bring a whole new language to a team, and the team sort of looks at the leader going, what the hell did he just read, So it's actually meant to be read by teams, and every chapter, the first part of the book just explains a lot of what I just talked about earlier. Here are all the statistics, here's all the stuff, here's where we are. And then the back half of the book is sort of piece by piece how to do stuff. Every chapter ends with do's and don'ts for managers and do's and don'ts for managees, right?
Yeah.
So, and the goal is that everyone read it, hopefully teams read it together so that they can choose how to move forward on all the different pieces. But if you are a manager of a millennial or a Gen Xer, because a lot of millennials are managing people. 36 years old is the oldest millennial right now. They got a lot of managers have people who are older than them, working for them. This is really, it's not necessarily about the millennial. It's about how to have an intergenerational workforce, which we are going to have for the next. We can't even imagine a place where we're not going to have it. This is the first time in American history where we've had 4 generations in the workplace. Millennials, Gen Xers, boomers, and traditionals are silent. And that's going to continue because people have to work longer. One, people are living longer. Mm-hmm. People have to work longer to afford their retirements. And that is not going away anytime soon for the vast majority of Americans.
So for the manager who's listening right now and saying, oh, man, she's talking about my struggles, my dealings with different generations, do you have one piece of advice or a tip that somebody could do today to make things easier at work?
My first tip is sit down with someone who's not your age or not in your generation and ask them how their work experience is. Ask them if they feel like they're being valued or not. And then listen. And then ask them what would make you feel valued or listened to. Because often the solution's in the answer, and it doesn't take that much change to make it really valuable. And it's important to say this. This is not about catering to millennials. Mm-hmm. This is about creating environments where millennials can thrive. And my experience is when millennials thrive, so do Gen Xers and boomers and silents. But if you create an environment that just caters or is where a Gen Xer can thrive, Gen Xers being more independent, fewer of you, can do things much more independently by nature, than the millennials who believe, are all about the team, and they really are. They're all about the team, and they believe they can lead from any seat in the boat, will not feel compelled to stay with you very long, and will leave.
Definitely a fascinating conversation. Lee, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. If listeners want to learn more about you or your book or what you're up to next, where's the best place to find you?
The best place to go is my personal website, which is leecaraher.com, LeeCaraher.com. Or you can follow me on Twitter at Lee Caraher, and you can get to my agency or my book or my blog all from there.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Todd. I really appreciate it.
What did you think of today's show? The conversation continues on www.octanner.com. Be sure to leave us a comment. Also, remember to rate, review, and subscribe to all our podcasts on iTunes. Now get out there and build something beautiful. It's your turn now.